In this video series, we are going to cover the stand command. Yes. We'll talk about what the stand command is, why we utilize it, and how do we teach our dog to stand, and why. In short, a stand is kind of what it sounds like. Not on 2 paws, but on 4 paws. So if your dog's in a down, we tell the dog to stand, and he stands up onto 4 paws. A couple of notes before we start demonstrating. A stand from a sit and a stand from a down are 2 different movements, so don't expect your dog to do a stand from a down after you've taught them a stand from a sit. Also, in this movement, we're going to be using spatial pressure a lot. I'm going to walk into my dog's space, creating some spatial pressure, and we're going to use that to our advantage in this movement. You may have to do this a little bit slower than me. You may have to do it a little bit faster than me, whichever. That's okay. If your dog is struggling, if you're luring your dog and they're kind of like melting like cheese onto the floor and going into a down, you may want to work on luring your dog backwards to create some stability within their hips, their muscle. If they're not strong enough, it's going to be hard for them to pop their rear end up into a standing position. Looks like this. Basically, I just lure my dog, yes, to where he's stepping backwards or she's stepping backwards, and we just practice that a lot. Anyways, regarding the stand, one thing to watch out for, make sure you're not putting your dog in a sit before you do this. Don't say sit, that is. If I say sit, and then I lure him into a stand, and I repeat that, soon enough, the sit is going to become freebie, the sit will become a stand, and we don't want that, right? So I will lure the dog into that SIT position before we start, but that's it. I'm not going to ask him to do it. I don't want to confuse him. I just want him to happen to be in that position every time that we start this exercise. Speaking of the exercise here, here's how it works. I'm going to slide my left foot in between Bear's 2 paws right here, like this. It's a slow down version of what I'm doing. Sliding my foot into his chest, and I'm taking my hand and I'm lowering it and pushing it past his nose into his chest, like this. He might stand up if I do this. Boom, like that. So low, and then I scoop it, and you can see right under his chin. It looks like that. Here's what it looks like. Yes. Yes. I'm being careful to try and not to overshadow. Yes. I'm trying to separate my inputs. Bear seems to be picking this up pretty well. Yes. So I'm going to progress him and show you how we would add the verbal cue in. Bear hasn't failed once. I'll do one more rep just to see if he does really get this pattern. Yeah, he's doing really good. Okay, so when we get to the point where your dog is doing as good as Bear's doing, and he's pretty much guessing it every time, now we're going to add a cue. Stand. Yes, and that's what it looks like. I say stand while my body is silenced. Then I proceed to do my body cue, and then we tie it in together and say yes in the end. You may have to mess around with your body positioning in relation to the dog. Some of you may have to start back here to get a step in. Some of you might have to start a little bit closer. I'm going to start about a foot away from Bear. And yes. And there you have it. Go back to the basics if you have to. Go back to luring if they're struggling with their rear end, popping it up. Once you get to the point where the dog is responding to the verbal cue, stand, alone, it would be okay then to ask your dog to sit and then stand. Yes. Eventually, I'm going to test this, and I'm just going to say, stand. And if he stands, he knows it. Yes, that was lucky. I don't think he actually knows it. But had he stood up after I said stand like that, I would say yes. If I can get 2, 3, 4 of those in a row just off of the verbal cue, I know my dog knows it. And that's what we look for. Let's go ahead and cover the stand from a down position. Stand. Yes, perfect. That was a good rep right there. Now, it looks very similar movement-wise to the stand from a sit position, and similar as well, we do not want to put our dog into a down by saying down and then start doing the stand. So get your dog into a down position to begin this exercise by luring them and not saying down. I'm going to take Bear, I'm just going to lure his head until his body goes down there. You can pay them if you want. You do not have to though. Similar to the stand from a sitting position, I'm gonna slide my feet in between his two legs and into that little pocket in his chest. At the same time, I'm going to do what we did in the last video with that hand movement where we bring it down below his nose and kind of up into his chest. It might happen fast. Bear's primed. We've been doing videos today, so we'll see. I think the trick with him is gonna be not getting him to jump up before. Okay, I think our setup is good, and here's what it looks like. We're gonna build this pattern in silence. Eventually, we will add the cue. Yes. Yes. Perfect. And lure him into the DOWN. Yes. Perfect. Good rep there. Key with these is going to be just to be patient. Yes. So sometime you're going to have to, at some point I should say, you're going to have to install the verbal cue. And here's what that looks like. We're in the DOWN position, and the only thing that changes is while our body is still and before we do anything else, we say the stand words. So I say stand before I move my body, and it looks like this. Stand. Yes. Eventually I can just abbreviate that body language, and he should do it. But we're so early in this teaching that I'm not going to start pulling my body language out of the equation. One more rep in ya. Okay. Stand. Yes. Perfect. That was a good rep right there. Some dogs respond to spatial pressure differently than others. So while you see me, I'm able to stand and get pretty far in there. With Bear, he's totally okay with it. If your dog is sensitive, he might not be. So you may have to go a little bit slower or stop a little bit earlier instead of getting your leg too far into their chest cavity. It might freak them out, is what I'm saying. We're going to end that training session there. There you have it, folks. That's how we do a stand from a down position. You're going to have to practice the stands a lot. It's not super easy, but they are really cool and super fun. On that note, we'll see you in the next video.
Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you like our content. It helps us more than you know, and we'll see you in the next video.